as my father raised his glass of 1982 vintage and mocked me before 300 Manhattan elites as his failure as a daughter. Their laughter cut deep, but they didn't know that the billion-dollar security system running his empire had just started a self-destruct countdown. I didn't cry. I simply adjusted the Patek Philippe watch hidden under my worn sleeve and whispered goodbye to the sterling legacy. Want to know the true cost of 20 years of scorn? Sit down. My name is Olivia Brown, but that is a name I chose for myself. A shield I forged to protect the fragile remnants of my soul. For the first 20 years of my life, I carried the heavy, gilded burden of being a sterling to the outside world. The Sterling family was the epitome of the American dream, a dynasty built on steel, glass, and ruthless venture capital. We lived in a penthouse that pierced the clouds above Manhattan, a place where the air was always filtered and the silence was always expensive. My father, William Sterling, was the titan of New York real estate, a man whose handshake could alter the skyline, but inside those marble walls, the air was thin, suffocating, and cold enough to freeze the blood in your veins. I was the ghost in the machine of their perfection. My mother, William's first wife, had died when I was barely old enough to remember the scent of her perfume, leaving me as a living artifact of a time my father preferred to forget. In her place stood Victoria, a woman of sharp angles and even sharper ambition, and her daughter, Sophia. If I was the ghost, Sophia was the sun. She was loud, vibrant, and demanding, sucking the oxygen out of every room she entered. Victoria ensured that Sophia shone, polishing her with adoration and money. While I was left to gather dust in the corners of their lives, the cracks in our facade were always there, hairline fractures in the porcelain. But the shattering blow came 12 years ago. I can still feel the texture of the envelope in my hands. It was thick, creamy paper, stamped with the seal of one of the most prestigious institutes of technology in the country. I had spent years studying in secret, hiding textbooks on coding and cybersecurity under my mattress like illicit contraband. While Sophia was learning how to host tea parties and charm investors, I was learning the language of machines. I had been accepted into the computer science program with a full academic recommendation, a feat that should have been a moment of triumph. I remember walking into my father's study that evening. The room smelled of aged mahogany and cigar smoke, a scent that I always associated with judgment. William was sitting behind his massive oak desk, reviewing quarterly reports. He didn't look up when I entered. He never did. "Father," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to steel myself, "I have been accepted." I placed the letter on the desk, right on top of his precious spreadsheets. He glanced at it, his eyes scanning the logo with a look of mild distaste, as if I had placed a dirty napkin on his work. He picked it up, not with pride, but with the pinch of 2 fingers, and dropped it back onto the desk. "Engineering," he said, the word rolling off his tongue like a curse. "It is dry, Olivia. It is mechanical. It is not for you. It is exactly for me," I argued, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "I have the aptitude. I just need you to sign for the tuition. The scholarship covers a portion, but I need the rest from my trust fund." William sighed, removing his reading glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked at me then, really looked at me, with eyes that were devoid of warmth. "There is no trust fund for this, Olivia." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean grandfather set it up for both of us?" "Plans change," he said, his voice flat and final. "I have decided to consolidate the educational funds. Sophia will be starting her degree in business administration next fall. She needs the capital to network, to intern at the right firms, to prepare for her role in the company." "Sophia," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Sophia barely passed high school. You are giving my tuition to her. Sophia has the temperament for leadership," he replied, returning his gaze to his papers. "You, Olivia, you are too quiet, too intense. Technology is a fad for people who cannot handle the real world of business. Besides, a woman does not need such a high degree in a technical field. It makes you unapproachable. You should look into something more domestic. Or perhaps find a husband. The injustice of it felt like a physical blow to the stomach. I stood there, paralyzed, watching him dismiss my entire future with a wave of his hand. But the true horror was yet to come. I left the study in a daze and wandered down the hall. Passing Victoria's private sitting room, the door was ajar, and I heard her voice, low and conspiratorial, talking on the phone. I shouldn't have stopped. I should have kept walking, but I heard my mother's name. Yes, the transfer is complete, Victoria was saying, a smug smile audible in her tone. The life insurance payout from his first wife. It has been sitting there for years. William finally agreed to release it. I froze. My mother's life insurance, that money was supposed to be untouchable. A sacred nest egg left specifically for me when I turned 18. I pushed the door open. Victoria looked up, not with guilt, but with annoyance. She was holding a brochure for a custom luxury yacht builder. "Where is it?" I demanded, my hands shaking. "Where is my mother's money?" Victoria hung up the phone slowly, her eyes narrowing. Eavesdropping is a nasty habit. "Olivia, you stole it," I whispered. "You took the insurance money." "Stole is such an ugly word," she said, standing up and smoothing her silk skirt. "We invested it. Sophia's 18th birthday is coming up. A girl of her stature needs a proper asset to entertain friends. A yacht is a networking tool. Olivia, you wouldn't understand. A yacht, my mother's life, her sacrifice, her final gift to me, had been converted into a floating party venue for Sophia." I turned and ran back to the study, bursting in without knocking. "You knew." I screamed at my father. "You let her take Mom's insurance money for a boat." William slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Enough. It is theft," I cried, tears finally spilling over. That was mine. "It is family money," he roared, standing up to his full height. "And as the head of this family, I decide where it goes. You are ungrateful. Olivia, you have lived under my roof, eaten my food, and now you dare to accuse my wife of theft." I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw him not as a father, but as a monster. A weak, pathetic monster controlled by his own vanity. "I will not stay here," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. "I will not live with thieves." Then he sneered, pointing a finger at the door. "But know this, Olivia, if you walk out that door, you leave with nothing, no money, no connections, no name. You think you are smart. You think you are special. You are nothing without me. I will make it on my own." I vowed. He laughed, a cruel, dry sound. You have never worked a day in your life. You will be back in a week, begging on your knees. Actually, I will give you 3 months. You will starve in 3 months. Olivia, now get out of my sight." The rest of the night was a blur of motion and pain. I went to my room, the room I had grown up in, and packed a single suitcase. I took no jewelry, no designer clothes that Victoria had bought to keep up appearances. I packed my jeans, my sweaters, my books, and the photograph of my mother that I kept hidden in my drawer. As I dragged my suitcase down the grand staircase, the house was already transforming. Caterers were rushing in, carrying trays of crystal glasses and bottles of vintage champagne. It was Sophia's birthday eve, and the pre-party was beginning. I saw Sophia standing near the entrance, surrounded by a gaggle of friends. She was wearing a dress that likely cost more than 4 years of college tuition. When she saw me with my suitcase, her eyes widened in mock surprise. "Going somewhere?" "Sis," she called out, holding a glass of sparkling wine. "You are going to miss the fireworks. Daddy ordered special ones from Italy." I didn't answer. I couldn't look at her without feeling the bile rise in my throat. I walked past her, past the servants who averted their eyes, and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The New York winter greeted me with a slap of freezing wind. It was sleeting, a miserable mix of rain and snow that soaked through my coat in seconds. The contrast was so sharp, it felt like a hallucination. Behind me, the golden light of the Sterling mansion spilled out onto the snow, accompanied by the sound of laughter and the clinking of glasses. Inside, it was warm, rich, and morally bankrupt. Outside, it was dark, freezing, and terrifyingly real. I walked down the long driveway, the wheels of my suitcase struggling against the slush. I could hear the music starting up, a heavy bass line that vibrated in my chest. They were celebrating. They were drinking to Sophia, to the yacht, to their perfect life. They were celebrating my erasure. I reached the iron gates and looked back one last time at the towering structure that had been my prison. I shivered, not just from the cold, but from the realization of what lay ahead. I had $70 in my pocket. I had nowhere to go. My father's words echoed in my ears. "You will starve in 3 months." I turned my back on the light. I gripped the handle of my suitcase tighter, my knuckles turning white. "I am not Olivia Sterling," I whispered to the empty street, the wind snatching the words from my lips. "Sterling is a currency of lies." I thought of my mother, the woman whose legacy had been stolen to buy a toy boat. Her maiden name was Brown. It was a common name, a plain name, a name that would disappear in a crowd. It was perfect. "My name is Olivia Brown," I said, louder this time, stepping into the darkness, and I would not starve. I would survive. And one day, I would make them pay for every single cent, every single tear, and every single second of this night. The cold seeped into my bones. But deep inside, a small, hot ember of rage began to glow. It was the only thing that kept me warm as I walked away from the only life I had ever known, into a world that promised me nothing but struggle. The Sterling girl died that night in the snow. Olivia Brown was born, and she had a long memory. Chicago was a different beast entirely from New York. If Manhattan was a cold shoulder, Chicago was a punch in the gut. The wind here did not just blow. It hunted you down through the grid of streets, finding every gap in your coat and every hole in your boots. I had traded the silent, suffocating luxury of the Sterling penthouse for a basement studio apartment in a neighborhood where the police sirens were the lullaby that sang me to sleep. The walls were thin enough to hear my neighbor coughing his lungs out at 3 a.m, and the radiator hissed like a dying snake, offering more noise than heat. My father had given me 3 months to starve. I was determined to make him a liar, even if it meant working myself into an early grave. I did not have one job. I had 3. My day began at 4 a.m. I worked the breakfast shift at a greasy spoon diner near the train tracks, pouring endless cups of weak coffee for truck drivers and factory workers who looked as tired as I felt. My hands, once manicured and soft, were now red, chapped, and constantly smelling of bacon grease and stale syrup. I learned to balance 5 plates on one arm, and I learned that a 20% tip was a rare blessing, not a standard gratuity. At 11 a.m, I clocked out of the diner and literally ran 6 blocks to an office building where I worked as a janitor until 3 p.m. There was a cruel irony in scrubbing the toilets of men who wore suits cut from the same cloth as my father's. I emptied their trash bins, wiped their coffee rings off mahogany desks, and made myself invisible. They never looked at me. To them, I was just a pair of hands holding a spray bottle, a part of the furniture that cleaned itself. My third shift was the hardest, from 6 p.m. until 2 a.m. I sat in a cramped cubicle at a telemarketing center, wearing a headset that pinched my ears, trying to sell extended car warranties to people who hated me the moment they picked up the phone. I was cursed at, hung up on, and threatened 70 times a night. My voice would grow hoarse, but I kept reading the script. I had to. Every hang-up was a reminder of the Sterling voice telling me I was worthless. Every successful sale was $1 closer to proving him wrong. Between these shifts, I existed in a state of perpetual exhaustion. I ate bread that I bought from the discount rack at the grocery store, the kind with the orange stickers warning that it was about to expire. I learned that if you toasted it enough, you could not taste the staleness. I drank tap water because bottled water was a luxury I could not justify, but my hunger was not just for food, it was for knowledge. My escape was the public library. On my rare breaks, or the few hours I had on Sunday mornings, I would sit at the public terminals, while others were checking social media or playing games. I was devouring the internet. I could not afford university tuition, so I stole my education. I found free coding boot camps, open source textbooks on cryptography, and forums where hackers traded secrets like baseball cards. I learned Python, Java, C++, and SQL. I studied network architecture until my eyes burned and the letters swam on the screen. I was building a castle in my mind, brick by digital brick. The turning point came on a Tuesday in November, 8 months after I had left New York. I had been fired from the diner the week before for dropping a tray of plates when my hands were shaking from low blood sugar. I had managed to pick up a few shifts at a trendy coffee shop in Wicker Park to make ends meet. It was cleaner work, but the clientele was more demanding. It was the lunch rush. The line was out the door, and the point-of-sale system, the computer register, was lagging. A man in a tailored charcoal suit was tapping his credit card on the counter, his impatience radiating off him in waves. "Card declined," I said, trying to keep my voice polite. "Try it again," he snapped. "It is a platinum card. It does not get declined." I swiped it again. The screen flashed an error message. I looked closer. It was not a decline due to funds. It was a timeout error. The system was stuck in a loop. I glanced at the debug log running in the corner of the screen, something the previous tech support had likely left open. I saw the problem immediately. A memory leak in the payment processing script was causing the buffer to overflow every time a transaction exceeded $50. "Sir, it is not your card," I said, my mind racing. "It is the system." "Well, fix it," he yelled, causing half the shop to turn and look. "I am late for a meeting. I did not think so. I just acted." I turned the screen toward me, hit the escape key to minimize the interface, and brought up the command line. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I had been studying this exact type of vulnerability the night before in a cybersecurity forum. I killed the hung process, flushed the cache, and patched the memory leak with a temporary script bypass. It took me maybe 40 seconds. I swiped his card. Approved. "Here is your receipt." "Sir," I said, handing it to him. He snatched it without a thank you and stormed off. I let out a breath, feeling a rush of adrenaline. I had just applied a patch to a live system in under a minute. "What do you think you're doing?" I froze. The manager, a petty tyrant named Gary who enjoyed making the female baristas cry, was standing behind me. His face was purple. The system froze. I explained. "I just reset the cache so we could keep processing orders." "You hacked the register," he screeched. "You were messing with the company's financial software. I fixed it." "Gary, it was a memory leak." "Get out," he hissed, pointing to the door. "You are fired. I am not having some thief messing with my books. Get your things and get out before I call the police." I tried to argue, but the look in his eyes told me it was useless. He did not care about the truth. He cared that I had made him feel stupid. I took off my apron, threw it on the counter, and walked out. I stood on the sidewalk, the cold Chicago wind instantly biting through my thin sweater. I had just lost my primary source of income. I had $74 in my bank account. Rent was due in 3 days. I felt the tears pricking my eyes. The first time I had wanted to cry since that night in the snow. That was an elegant piece of code. I turned around. A man was sitting at one of the outdoor metal tables. Despite the freezing temperature, he had a thick gray beard, wire-rimmed glasses, and he was wearing a heavy wool coat that looked like it had seen better decades. He was nursing a black coffee and looking at me with eyes that were sharp, clear, and terrifyingly intelligent. "Excuse me," I asked, wiping my eyes quickly. "The buffer overflowed," he said, his voice gravelly. "Most people would have just rebooted the machine. You rewrote the execution path, and you did it without a keyboard, using a touchscreen. That takes dexterity." "Who are you?" I asked, stepping back. "The name is Silas," he said, "and you look like you just lost a job you were overqualified for. I am not interested in whatever you are selling," I said, turning to walk away. I am not selling anything, Silas called out. I am buying. I saw you at the library last week. You were reading about zero-day exploits on a public terminal. You have raw talent, kid, but you are sloppy. You left your digital footprint all over that register just now. If I was fed, you would be in cuffs. I stopped. He knew too much. What do you want? I asked. Facing him, I need an apprentice, he said. Standing up, he was tall, leaning on a cane. I used to be in the game. Now I am retired, but my eyes are getting bad, and my fingers are getting stiff. I have projects. I need hands that are fast and minds that are hungry. Does it pay? I asked bluntly. Better than pouring coffee, he replied, but the hours are worse, and if you steal from me, I will not fire you. I will erase your identity so thoroughly that even your mother would not find your birth certificate. I looked at him. I had nothing to lose. My mother was dead, and my father wished I was. I am Olivia. I said, I know. Silas smiled, a crooked expression that revealed a gold tooth. I did a background check on you while you were arguing with your boss. Let's go. Olivia Brown. Classes in session. That day marked the beginning of my real education. Silas lived in a converted warehouse in the industrial district, a place that looked abandoned from the outside, but inside was a fortress of servers, cooling fans, and monitors. He was a legend in the underground, a white-hat hacker who had turned gray over the years. He did not just teach me how to code. He taught me how to think. For the next 5 years, I ceased to exist as a normal human being. I became a ghost. Silas was a hard taskmaster. He would wake me up at 3 in the morning and tell me to breach a firewall he had set up, giving me 10 minutes before he shut down the power. He made me memorize encryption keys. He taught me social engineering, how to manipulate people into giving up their passwords just by the tone of my voice. We took on contracts that no one else could handle. We were the last resort for desperate people. We tracked down missing funds for widows who had been scammed by offshore princes. We exposed a ring of corporate saboteurs who were destroying small businesses in the Midwest. We worked in the shadows, never meeting our clients. Payments arriving in cryptocurrency that we washed through a dozen different exchanges. I stopped scrubbing toilets. I stopped serving coffee. I started making money, real money. The first time I saw $5,000 hit my secure account, I stared at the screen for an hour. It was more money than I had made in 6 months at the diner, but I did not spend it. I lived in the same crappy apartment. I wore the same clothes. I saved every penny. I was building a war chest, but the success came with a price. The isolation was absolute. Silas was not a friend. He was a mentor, and a paranoid one at that. I had no social life, no boyfriend, no parties. The holidays were the worst. I remember one Christmas Eve, 3 years into my training, I was alone in my apartment. The heating had actually broken down, so I was wrapped in 3 blankets, eating a cup of instant noodles. I had bought a copy of the Wall Street Journal earlier that day. I opened it to the society page. There, in full color, was a photograph of the Sterling family at their annual Christmas gala. William looked regal in his tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne. Victoria was draped in emeralds, and Sophia was smiling, hanging off the arm of a senator's son, looking like the Princess of New York. The caption read, "The Sterling family celebrates another record-breaking year. Sophia Sterling, Vice President of Marketing, announces the purchase of a new luxury yacht, the Sea Star." My mother's money, my inheritance, they were parading it in front of the world while I ate noodles in the dark. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. Hot and angry, I cut the picture out with a pair of scissors. I taped it to the wall above my desk, right next to my monitors. I was not sad. I did not call them. I looked at their smiles, at their arrogance, at their complete lack of awareness that I was still alive. Enjoy the champagne. Father, I whispered to the paper, enjoy the boat. Sophia. I turned back to my computer. The blue light of the screen illuminated my face, casting long shadows in the empty room. I had work to do. Silas had given me a new assignment testing the security protocols of a major banking conglomerate. I began to type. The rhythmic clacking of the keyboard was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a weapon being sharpened. I was no longer the girl who cried in the snow. I was a weapon forged in the fires of poverty and tempered by the cold logic of code, and I was coming for them. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Every line of code I wrote was a step closer to Manhattan. Every firewall I breached was practice for the walls around the Sterling Empire. They thought they had buried me, but they had only planted a seed, and in the darkness of the Chicago underground, that seed was growing into a vine of thorns that would one day strangle them all. Seattle rain is different from the biting sleet of Chicago or the dirty slush of New York. It is persistent, rhythmic, and strangely cleansing. From where I stood, on the 42nd floor of the Aegis Prime headquarters, the city looked like a circuit board of gray and green, washed clean by the constant downpour. I was 32 years old, and the woman who had shivered in a basement apartment eating expired bread was now a memory so distant she felt like a character from a book I had read long ago. The building itself was a statement. Located in the heart of South Lake Union, it was a monolith of black glass and steel that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. There was no massive sign shouting the company name from the rooftop, no flashy logo in the lobby, just a sleek, matte black structure that the locals whispered about. They called it the Black Box. Inside, however, was the nervous system of the modern global economy. I had founded Aegis Prime 5 years ago with the capital I had scraped together from my time in the underground. The name was deliberate. In mythology, the Aegis is the shield of Zeus and Athena, and that is exactly what we were, in a world where data was more valuable than gold, and far easier to steal. My company provided the ultimate armor. Our crown jewel was Sentinel. It was not just a firewall or an antivirus program. It was a polymorphic artificial intelligence that lived within a client's server. It was learned. It adapted. If a hacker tried to probe a weakness, Sentinel would not just block them. It would rewrite its own code in real time to close the gap and then trace the intruder back to their source. It was an aggressive, intelligent defense. It was everything I wished I had been when I was 20. Wall Street had fallen in love with it. 3 of the 5 largest banks in America ran on Sentinel. 2 major defense contractors used our encryption. My algorithms protected trillions of dollars in assets every single second of the day. Yet, nobody knew who I was. That was the iron rule of Aegis Prime. I was the ghost in the machine. I had a team of high-priced, impeccably dressed legal representatives and a charismatic chief financial officer named David, who handled all the handshakes, the press conferences, and the magazine covers. To the public, Aegis Prime was a faceless entity of brilliance. To the boardrooms, I was simply the architect, a mythical figure that some speculated was actually a collective of hackers or an AI itself. This anonymity was my greatest luxury. It allowed me to walk through Pike Place Market in a raincoat and jeans, buying fresh salmon without anyone looking twice. It allowed me to drive a reliable, mid-range sedan that blended into traffic, while Sophia was undoubtedly posting photos of her latest Italian sports car on social media. I was navigating the rainy streets of Seattle in a vehicle that cost less than one of her handbags. My wealth had quietly surpassed my father's 2 years ago. The valuation of Aegis Prime was astronomical, and as the sole founder and majority shareholder, my net worth was in the billions. But money, for me, was not about accumulation. It was about utility. It was a tool to fix things that were broken. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk. It was a wide slab of reclaimed wood, devoid of paper. The only light came from the 6 monitors arranged in a semicircle, displaying real-time threat maps of the world. A notification pinged on my private server. It was a confirmation email from a law firm in New York. Subject acquisition complete. Asset verified. I opened the attachment. It was a deed. I bought a house, not a mansion in the Hamptons or a penthouse in London. It was a modest, 2-story colonial in the suburbs of Connecticut. It was the house my mother had grown up in. the house where she had raised me before she married William Sterling. After she died, my father had sold it instantly, calling it sentimental clutter. I had tracked down the current owners, a nice elderly couple, and offered them 3 times the market value to sell it to a shell company I controlled. I would not live there. I just needed to know that it was safe. I needed to know that the garden where my mother taught me the names of flowers belonged to me, not to strangers, and certainly not to the Sterling estate. It was a reclaiming of history, a small piece of my soul that I had bought back with the fortune I had built from nothing. My intercom buzzed. It was David. Olivia. Do you have a moment? It is regarding the personnel file you flagged. Send him in, I said. A moment later, a young man named Marcus walked in. He looked terrified. Marcus was one of our junior analysts, a brilliant kid from Detroit who reminded me painfully of myself 10 years ago. He was wearing a suit that was slightly too large, likely bought secondhand. Sit down. Marcus, I said, gesturing to the chair. He sat, fidgeting with his tie. Ms. Brown, if this is about the server lag last week, I swear I fixed the patch within 10 minutes. It is not about the server. I said, my voice soft. I reviewed the HR logs. You declined the company health insurance plan for your daughter, and I noticed you have been sleeping in your car in the parking garage for the past 3 nights. Marcus went pale. He looked like he was about to be sick. I am sorry, ma'am. My rent went up, and my daughter. She got into that private accelerated program for math, the one I told my manager about. The tuition as well. It is everything I have. I figured I could live in the car for a few months until I get my bonus. Please do not fire me. I will park on the street. I looked at him, and for a second, I was back in William Sterling's study. I heard my father's voice saying, "Plans change. There is no trust fund." I felt the crushing weight of a dream being suffocated by the greed of someone who had the power to help but chose not to. I typed a command into my terminal. Marcus, I said, you are not going to sleep in your car. That is a security risk for the company. Tired analysts make mistakes. I promise I will be alert. He stammered. Stop, I commanded gently. I just transferred a bonus to your account. It covers your rent for the next 2 years. His mouth fell open. What? And regarding your daughter, I continued, looking him in the eye. Aegis Prime has a new policy as of this morning. We cover 100% of tuition costs for the children of all employees. From kindergarten through university, your daughter's school is paid for. Marcus stared at me, tears welling up in his eyes. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Why? Why would you do that? Because talent should not be stopped by a price tag, I said, turning back to my screens to hide the emotion in my own eyes. And because a father should never have to choose between his dignity and his child's future. Go home, Marcus. Get some sleep. He left the office walking on air, murmuring thank yous that I waved away. I sat there for a moment in silence. It was the most expensive policy change I had ever enacted. Costing the company millions annually, my accountants would scream, but it was the first time in years I felt a genuine sense of satisfaction. I was rewriting the script. I was becoming the person I had needed when I was 18. But the universe has a strange sense of timing. Just as the door clicked shut behind Marcus, a red alert flashed on my central monitor. It was a priority notification from the Global Financial Watchdog System, a publicly available feed. But my algorithms filtered it for high-impact events. Urgent, massive data breach reported at Sterling Holdings. I felt the air in the room drop 10 degrees. I leaned forward, my heart rate accelerating not from fear, but from the thrill of the hunt. I pulled up the details. It was catastrophic. Sterling Holdings, the empire my father had built on intimidation and leverage, had been hit, and they had been hit hard. A hacker group not sophisticated, but brute force aggressive had bypassed their outdated firewalls. They had accessed the client database, social security numbers, private investment portfolios, offshore account details of senators and celebrities. It was all being held for ransom. I watched the stock ticker on the side of my screen. Sterling Holdings, STH, was dropping, Down 2% in 10 minutes. Down 4%. The panic was setting in. I typed a query into Sentinel, asking it to run a diagnostic on the Sterling network from the outside. The results came back in seconds. Their security was laughable. It was a patchwork of legacy systems and cheap third-party software. It was exactly what happened when you had a CEO who thought technology was dry and mechanical. My father had spent decades building a fortress of money, but he had left the back door wide open because he was too arrogant to understand the digital age. And Sophia was likely hyperventilating in a boardroom right now, realizing that her charm and her parties could not flirt a virus out of a server. The phone on my desk rang. It was the private line, the one only 3 people had. It was David again. "Olivia, are you seeing this?" David asked, his voice tight with excitement. "I am looking at it right now." I replied, "The Sterling board is in a panic." David said, "The hackers are threatening to dump the data in 48 hours if a ransom of $100 million is not paid. But the FBI has advised them not to pay. They are looking for a contractor, a savior." I leaned back in my chair, swiveling slightly to look out at the rain-soaked city. The gray sky seemed to brighten just a fraction. "They will call everyone else first," I said calmly. "They will call the big legacy firms. They will try to fix it in-house, and they will fail." David finished for me. "Their architecture is too compromised. The other firms will take weeks to patch this. Sterling does not have weeks. They have hours before the shareholders revolt. Wait for it." "David," I said, "let them bleed a little. Let the stock drop another 10%. Let William Sterling feel the walls closing in." I tapped my finger on the desk, the rhythm matching the ticking of a clock. "Prepare the jet, David, and draft a contract. The standard Tier 1 protection package." "Standard?" David asked. "You want to give them the standard deal, no?" I corrected him, a cold smile touching my lips. "I want the predatory package. Full system access, administrative override, and a 40% stake in all future net profits as a service fee." 40%, David let out a low whistle. "That is extortion, Olivia. They will never sign that." "They will sign it," I said, watching the stock ticker drop another point. "Because the alternative is extinction. When they call, and they will call. Tell them the architect is busy. Tell them they have to wait." I hung up the phone. On my screen, a news alert popped up, a video clip of William Sterling pushing past reporters, his face gray and sweaty, looking older than I had ever seen him. Sophia was behind him, shielding her face with a designer clutch, for once looking small and defenseless. I touched the screen, tracing the line of my father's jaw. "Hello, Father," I whispered. "You said I would be back in 3 months, begging. It took 12 years. But I am not the one begging." I stood up and walked to the window. The reflection in the black glass stared back at me. I did not see a victim. I did not see the girl who scrubbed toilets. I saw Aegis. I saw the shield, and I was about to bring the hammer down. The game had officially begun. The crisis at Sterling Holdings unfolded on my monitors like a slow-motion car crash, hideous and mesmerizing in equal measure. While the rain lashed against the windows of my Seattle office, the storm inside the boardroom on Wall Street was entirely man-made. I had hacked into their internal security cameras hours ago. It was child's play. Their systems were so antiquated that I did not even need to deploy Sentinel. A simple backdoor script I had written in my sleep was enough to turn their private sanctuary into my personal theater. I sat in my ergonomic chair, sipping herbal tea, watching the man who had once been a giant to me shrink into a terrified old man. William Sterling was pacing the length of the mahogany conference table, his face a mask of ash-gray fear. His tie was loosened. The top button of his shirt undone, a sign of disarray I had never seen in 30 years. "Do something," he roared, slamming his fist onto the table. The sound transmitted clearly through my speakers. Sophia was sitting in the corner, clutching a tablet as if it were a life raft. She looked immaculate in a white designer suit, but her eyes were darting around the room with the panic of a trapped animal. "I am trying, Daddy," she shrilled, her voice cracking. "I called the PR firm. They are drafting a statement to deny the breach. Deny it, William shouted. Spinning on his heel, the hackers just emailed the private browsing history of Senator Reynolds to the Washington Post. They have offshore ledgers if they release the client list. We are not just bankrupt. Sophia, we are going to prison. The room was filled with high-priced consultants and lawyers, men and women who usually billed by the minute, but were now sitting in stunned silence. They had tried everything. They had rebooted servers. They had tried to negotiate with the hackers. They had called the FBI, but the hackers were a new breed, aggressive, decentralized, and hungry. They did not just want money, they wanted to watch the world burn, or at least, watch the Sterling Empire turn to ash. One of the senior IT consultants, a man with sweat stains under his arms, cleared his throat. Mr. Sterling, there is only one option left. We have reached out to every major cybersecurity firm in the city. They all said the same thing. The encryption used by these attackers is a military-grade polymorphic strain. Symantec cannot touch it. McAfee cannot touch it. Then who can William demand it? The consultant hesitated, looking down at his shoes. Aegis Prime. The room went silent. The name hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I do not want them, William spat. I have heard about them. They are arrogant. They are secretive. They charge a fortune. They are the only ones who have Sentinel, the consultant said quietly. If you want to save the data before the market opens tomorrow, you have to call Seattle. I watched William's face contort. He was a man who hated needing anyone, especially a faceless entity from the West Coast tech scene that he despised. But he looked at the stock ticker running on the wall screen. Sterling Holdings was down 28% in 4 hours. The sharks were circling. Call them, he whispered. Defeated. I smiled. It was time. I tapped my earpiece. David, you are up. Remember the script? No mercy. Copy that. David's voice came back, calm and professional. I am entering the building now. David walked into the Sterling boardroom 20 minutes later. He looked every inch the shark that William wished he was. He wore a bespoke navy suit, carried a slim leather briefcase, and projected an aura of absolute control. He did not apologize for the delay. He did not offer a handshake. He simply walked to the head of the table, opposite my father, and placed a single tablet on the polished wood. Good afternoon. Gentlemen, Ms. Sterling, David said, nodding briefly to Sophia. I am David Thorne, Chief Financial Officer of Aegis Prime. We understand you have a pest control problem. William bristled. We have a hostage situation. Mr. Thorne, to us, it is just pests, David replied coolly. We have analyzed the signature of the attack. We can neutralize it. We can decrypt your data. We can secure your perimeter. How long? William asked. 40 minutes from the moment you sign our contract. David said, 40 minutes. Sophia scoffed. Our IT team has been working for 12 hours. Your IT team is trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. David countered without looking at her. Sentinel extinguishes the oxygen. Let's talk numbers, William said, sitting down heavily. How much? 10 million, 20. David smiled. A thin, predatory expression I had practiced with him. We do not want a flat fee. Mr. Sterling, Aegis Prime enters into partnerships. Not service calls. Partnerships. William narrowed his eyes. We require full administrative control of your entire digital infrastructure, David stated, his voice steady. Every server, every email, every transaction will be routed through our Sentinel nodes for real-time monitoring. That is preposterous. William slammed his hand on the table again. You want to spy on us? We want to protect you, David corrected. You cannot protect what you do not control. And secondly, our fee structure is performance-based. We take 40% of the net profit of Sterling Holdings for the duration of the contract. 40%. William gasped, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. That is robbery. That is nearly half our earnings. The room erupted in protests. The lawyers started shouting about fiduciary duties and shareholder rights. David stood perfectly still, waiting for the noise to subside. When the room was quiet again, David tapped the tablet. The hackers just released a sample of the data. It is the medical records of your largest investor, Mr. Henderson. William paled. The stock just dropped another 3%, David noted, checking his watch. In another hour, there will not be any profits to take 40% of. There will only be liquidation. The choice is yours, Mr. Sterling. You can own 100% of a corpse, or 60% of a living company. William looked at Sophia. She was weeping silently now, her mascara running down her cheeks. He looked at the lawyers, who were all checking their phones and shaking their heads. He was alone. The Emperor had no clothes, and the winter wind was blowing. "Where do I sign?" William rasped, his voice broken. David slid the tablet across the table. Digital signature, thumbprint required. I watched through the camera lens, my heart pounding against my ribs, as my father pressed his thumb against the screen. He was signing away his autonomy. He was signing away his secrets. He was signing his empire over to the daughter he had thrown out into the snow. "Done," David said, retracting the tablet. "Deploying Sentinel now. On my screen in Seattle. I authorized the deployment." The code surged through the fiber optic cables, crossing the continent in milliseconds. It hit the Sterling network like a tidal wave. I watched as Sentinel identified the intruder nodes, red dots on my map, and systematically isolated them. It was beautiful. The hackers tried to fight back, but Sentinel was faster, rewriting the encryption keys, locking them out, and tracing their IPs to a server farm in Eastern Europe. In 38 minutes, the system was clean, the data was decrypted, the leak was plugged. "It is done," David announced in the boardroom. "Your data is secure. The stock should stabilize within the hour." William slumped in his chair, wiping sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. "Thank you," he muttered, looking like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. David stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Do not thank us, Mr. Sterling. We are partners now. We will be watching." David left the room. But I stayed, or rather, my eyes stayed. Now that Aegis Prime had full administrative access, I owned the Sterling network. I had root access to everything. Every email sent since 1998, every financial transaction, every hidden folder. While William and Sophia began the pathetic process of congratulating themselves on surviving, I began to dig. I commanded Sentinel to bypass the standard accounting logs and look for anomalies in the secondary ledgers. I knew my father was a ruthless businessman, but he was usually careful to stay within the gray areas of the law. But Sophia was lazy, and lazy people make mistakes. It took me less than an hour to find it. It was a folder named Consulting_Projects, hidden deep within a subdirectory of the marketing drive. To a normal auditor, it would look like standard expenses. But to me, looking at the metadata, it was a smoking gun. There were dozens of invoices for market research and brand development paid to shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands and Panama. The amounts were staggering. $500,000 here, $2 million there. I traced the ownership of the shell companies. It took a few extra lines of code to pierce the corporate veil. The beneficial owner was not a stranger. It was not a vendor. It was Sophia Sterling. She was siphoning money from her own father's company. She was billing the company for services that never existed and funneling the cash into her private accounts to fund her lifestyle. The yacht, the jewelry, the parties, it wasn't just funded by her salary, it was funded by embezzlement. And then I saw something even darker: tax evasion. The expenses were being written off to lower the corporate tax liability. This was federal crime territory. If the IRS saw this, Sophia would not just be fired. She would be facing 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitors illuminating my face. I had the knife in my hand. I could twist it right now. I could leak this to the FBI, to the press, to my father. I could destroy Sophia before the sun set. I watched her on the camera feed. She was laughing now, pouring a glass of champagne, her arrogance returning as quickly as her fear had vanished. "We handled that perfectly. Daddy," she was saying, "I told you everything would be fine." I stared at her smiling face. "No, Not yet. Destroying them now would be too easy. It would be a mercy killing. They needed to feel safe again. They needed to believe they had won. They needed to climb higher so that the fall would shatter every bone in their bodies. I wanted them to host their gala. I wanted them to invite the world to witness their triumph. I wanted my father to give his retirement speech. I wanted Sophia to believe she was the queen of the world. I closed the folder, but I did not delete it. I copied it to a secure, encrypted drive on my personal server. I labeled it the guillotine. I picked up my phone and texted David. "Good work. They are secure. Let the contract run." We wait. I looked at the screen one last time. William was raising a glass to Sophia. "To the future of Sterling Holdings," he said. "To the future," I whispered back, my voice cold as the Seattle rain. I had the leverage. I had control. And now, I have the patience. I would fatten the prey. I would let them gorge themselves on their own hubris. And when the moment was perfect, when the lights were brightest and the crowd was loudest, I would reveal exactly who held the leash. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, delivered not by mail, but by a private courier in a charcoal uniform who looked down his nose at my receptionist. It was a heavy, cream-colored envelope, thick enough to be used as a weapon, sealed with the Sterling family crest in actual wax. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of the pretension before I even opened it. Inside was a card embossed with gold leaf so thick it practically raised off the paper. "The Sterling family cordially invites you to the 40th anniversary of Sterling Holdings and the retirement celebration of William Sterling." And below that, in slightly larger font, "Witness the dawn of a new era as Sophia Sterling assumes the mantle of CEO." I almost laughed. A new era. An era led by a woman who thought branding meant plastering her initials on everything she owned, and who was currently funneling tax-free dollars into offshore accounts I was monitoring. But the real kick was the handwritten note tucked inside, penned in Victoria's sharp, jagged calligraphy. It was not a greeting, it was a set of instructions. "Olivia, we are doing a feature for Forbes magazine. They want a legacy photo with the entire family. Your father insists you be included to show our benevolence. Please try to dress appropriately for once. Do not wear those rags you seem so fond of. We need to project success, not charity cases. If you cannot afford a decent gown, call my secretary, and she will arrange a small stipend for a rental. Do not embarrass us. Victoria." I sat there, staring at the note. The sheer, unadulterated audacity took my breath away. They did not want me there because they missed me. They wanted a prop. They needed the prodigal daughter to stand in the back row, looking grateful and reformed, to prove that the Sterling family was so magnanimous they even kept the ruts of the litter around. I crumbled the note in my fist, ready to toss the entire package into the shredder. I had no interest in being a background extra in their vanity project. I had an empire to run. "You have to go," a voice said from the doorway. I looked up. David was leaning against the door frame, holding a tablet. He had seen the invitation. "I am not going." "David," I said, tossing the paper ball into the trash, "I am not going to stand there and let them look down on me while I eat their cold canapes. I own them. I could shut off the lights in the ballroom with a single command from my phone." "Exactly," David said, walking into the room. "You own them. That is why you have to go." He sat down opposite me, his expression serious. "Olivia, this is not just a party. This is the handover. This is the moment William officially steps down. If you want to pull the trigger, you do not do it from a dark office in Seattle. You do it looking them in the eye." He was right. I knew he was right. I had spent 12 years hiding in the shadows, building my strength. But shadows were for ghosts, and I was done being a ghost. "Fine," I said, a cold resolve settling in my chest. "I will go, but I am not taking Victoria's stipend." I prepared for the event like I was preparing for a tactical raid. The note had told me to dress appropriately, implying I should try to look like a poor imitation of them. I decided to go in a different direction. I did not want to look like I was trying to fit in. I wanted to look like I existed on a plane of existence they could not even afford to visit. I flew to a small atelier in Tokyo for the fitting. The designer was a man who did not have a label, did not do fashion weeks, and only accepted 5 clients a year. The dress he made for me was black, just black, but it was cut from a fabric that absorbed light, a matte silk that moved like liquid smoke. It had no sequins, no lace, no logos. It was a masterpiece of architectural tailoring that fit me like a second skin. To the untrained eye like Sophia's, it would look like a plain black dress. To anyone who knew anything about true luxury, it screamed power. For jewelry, I bypassed the vaults of polished, glittering stones that Victoria loved. Instead, I wore a necklace of raw, uncut diamonds. They looked like rough chunks of ice, jagged and asymmetrical, strung on a simple platinum wire. They were worth more than the entire Sterling estate. Mined from a conflict-free zone I had personally invested in, they were brutal, unrefined, and unbreakable, just like me. But the final touch was the car. I had a garage full of Teslas and vintage Porsches. But for tonight, I went to a used car lot and bought a 10-year-old sedan with a dent in the rear bumper and an engine that rattled when it idled. I needed to maintain the illusion one last time. I needed them to see the failure so they wouldn't see the blade coming. The gala was held at the most expensive hotel in Manhattan, a place of gilded ceilings and crystal chandeliers. I drove my rattling sedan up to the valet stand, right behind a line of Bentleys and Maybachs. The valet, a young man in a red vest, looked at my car with open confusion. He hesitated, clearly wondering if I was a delivery driver who had taken a wrong turn. "Valet parking, please," I said, rolling down the window and handing him a $20 bill. He took the keys gingerly, as if the rust might be contagious. "Right away." "Miss?" I stepped out of the car. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of expensive perfume and exhaust fumes. I smoothed my dress and walked toward the grand entrance. The red carpet was flanked by photographers, their flashes popping like lightning, and there, at the top of the stairs, holding court like royalty, were William, Victoria, and Sophia. Sophia was a vision of excess. She was wearing a gold sequined gown that was so tight she could barely breathe, covered in the interlocking logos of a famous French fashion house. She looked like a walking billboard for a duty-free shop. Her neck was weighed down by a sapphire necklace that I recognized immediately. It was one of the pieces Victoria had bought with the investment returns from my mother's stolen insurance money. Sophia spotted me coming up the stairs. Her eyes widened, scanning my plain black dress and my strange rock necklace. A smirk curled her lips. She whispered something to William, who frowned but did not look at me. She stepped forward to block my path before I could reach the photographers. "Olivia," she exclaimed, her voice pitched high and fake, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "You actually came, and look at you, so simple." "Hello, Sophia," I said, my voice steady. "Happy birthday. Or is it a coronation today?" She laughed. A tinkling, glass-breaking sound. "Oh, don't be sour. I see you got Mom's note about the dress code. It is a bit drab, isn't it? But I suppose black is slimming. It hides the struggle." She reached out and flicked the fabric of my sleeve with a manicured nail. "And did you drive here? I heard a terrible noise earlier. I thought the garbage truck was backing up. It gets me from point A to point B." I said, playing the part. "Well, try to stay out of the official photos until the very end," she hissed, her smile never wavering for the cameras. "We want the Forbes shot to look aspirational, not like a charity appeal. Oh, and security." She waved over a burly man with an earpiece. "This is my sister. Please check her bag thoroughly. We cannot have any desperate measures taken tonight. You know how people get when they are jealous." The security guard looked uncomfortable. "Ms. Sterling, that is not necessary. Check it," Sophia commanded, her eyes flashing. I handed my small black clutch to the guard. He opened it. Inside was a single tube of lipstick, a phone, and a thin titanium USB drive. He glanced at the USB drive. "Just work files," I said calmly. He nodded and handed the bag back. "You are clear, ma'am." Sophia lost interest in me the moment a famous actor arrived at the bottom of the stairs. Go find a drink. Olivia, the open bar is probably the highlight of your year. Try not to drink too much. We do not have a guest room for you. I walked past her, into the ballroom. The room was suffocating. 300 of New York's elite were packed into the space, holding flutes of champagne and talking about mergers, acquisitions, and summer homes. The noise was a drone of self-congratulation. I navigated through the crowd, feeling like a wolf in a flock of sheep. I saw faces I recognized: aunts, uncles, cousins, people who had watched me grow up and then watched me get thrown out without lifting a finger. Olivia. I turned. It was Aunt Margaret, my father's older sister. She was holding a plate of oysters and looking at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Aunt Margaret, I said, dipping my head slightly. My God, look at you. She sighed, looking me up and down. You look so thin. Are you eating? Dear, we heard you were in Chicago working as a cleaner. I work in tech now. I said vaguely. Tech support, she asked, shaking her head. Well, I suppose it is honest work. It is just such a shame. You had so much potential before you, well, before you lost your way. Look at Sophia. She is glowing. She is going to run the company. You know, William is so proud. I looked over at the stage where Sophia was now laughing with a group of investors, her hand resting possessively on William's arm. Yes, I said. She certainly looks expensive. Well, grab a plate. Dear, Margaret said, dismissing me as she spotted someone more important. The lobster is free. God knows when you will eat lobster again. I walked away. Finding a quiet corner near the kitchen doors, I stood there, clutching my bag, watching them. They were so confident. They were so secure in their bubble of wealth and influence. They thought I was the tragedy of the family. They thought I was a cautionary tale. I looked at my watch. It was a Patek Philippe, a rare model worth more than the car I had driven here, but I wore it with the face turned inward on my wrist so no one would see. It was 7:55 in the evening. The speeches were scheduled for 8 o'clock. My phone buzzed in my clutch. It was a text from David. I am in position. The legal team is on standby in the lobby. Signal when ready. I looked around the room one last time. I saw the sneers. I heard the whispers. I felt the weight of 20 years of exclusion. They mocked me for being uneducated. Yet I had built the most sophisticated intelligence network in the world. They mocked me for being worthless. Yet I owned the debt that kept their lights on. I took a sip of the sparkling water I had grabbed from a passing tray. It tasted like victory. Let them have their moment, I thought. Let them mock the black dress and the old car. Let them think they have won. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. The music swelled to a crescendo. Ladies and gentlemen, a voice announced over the speakers. Please welcome the founder of Sterling Holdings, Mr. William Sterling. The room erupted in applause. William walked onto the stage, waving, looking every inch the patriarch. He adjusted the microphone, his face beaming with the pride of a man who believes he has conquered the world. I stepped out of the shadows and moved closer to the stage. I wanted a front row seat. I wanted him to see me when the world fell apart. I fingered the rough diamond around my neck. It was sharp enough to cut glass. Tonight, it would cut through something much harder: the Sterling ego. The play was over. It was time for the reality check. The champagne was flowing like the Hudson River, only golden and far more toxic. I stood near the swinging doors of the kitchen, a spot usually reserved for staff and security details, holding a glass of sparkling water that had gone warm in my hand. From this vantage point, I could see the entire ecosystem of the Sterling Empire feeding on itself. Waiters in white gloves moved through the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns like ghosts, offering trays of caviar and foie gras to people who had likely never known the sensation of actual hunger. The ballroom was a kaleidoscope of diamonds and teeth. Everyone was smiling, but none of the smiles reached their eyes. They were sharks circling the water, looking for the next merger, the next acquisition, the next weakness to exploit. And tonight, The main course was the Sterling legacy. The lights dimmed, casting the room into a hushed twilight. Save for the single, brilliant spotlight that cut through the darkness to illuminate the stage, my father, William Sterling, stepped into the light. The applause was thunderous, a wave of sycophantic noise that seemed to physically push against my chest. He looked the part of the benevolent patriarch perfectly. His silver hair was coiffed, his tuxedo was impeccable, and his face held that practiced expression of humble superiority that he had perfected over 40 years of boardroom warfare. "Thank you," he boomed, his voice amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, echoing off the gilded ceiling. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate not just a milestone for Sterling Holdings, but the dawn of a new chapter." He paused for effect, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be commanding. 40 years ago, I started this company with nothing but a desk and a telephone. He lied. He had started it with a $2 million loan from his father. But that was a detail he always conveniently omitted from the mythology. Today, we stand at the pinnacle of the industry, but a king is nothing without an heir. And tonight, I am the proudest father in New York. He extended a hand towards Sophia, who was standing stage left, preening like a peacock. "Ladies and gentlemen, the future of Sterling Holdings, my daughter, Sophia Sterling." The applause started again, polite but enthusiastic. Sophia walked to the center of the stage, feigning surprise and humility, two emotions she had never experienced in her life. William wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Many of you know Sophia as the face of our charitable foundations," William continued, his voice dripping with pride. "But what you do not know is the steel-trap mind she possesses for business. Just last month, it was Sophia who secured the contract for the waterfront redevelopment project in Miami. It was her vision, her tireless dedication, that saved the deal when our competitors were circling." I took a sip of my warm water to wash down the bile rising in my throat. The Miami deal. I remembered it well. Sophia had forgotten to submit the environmental impact compliance forms until 3 hours before the deadline because she was partying in Ibiza. The automated crawler bots of Aegis Prime had flagged the omission. My team had remotely accessed the municipal server, uploaded the missing documents, and backdated the digital timestamps to ensure the bid was valid. We had saved the project while Sophia was sleeping off a hangover, and now, she was being crowned a genius for it. "She is a prodigy," William declared, beaming at her. "She has the Sterling instinct. She understands that business is not just about numbers. It is about people. It is about relationships." He paused again, and I saw his eyes scanning the room. I knew what was coming. I had felt the shift in the air. He needed a counterweight to make Sophia shine brighter. He needed a shadow. He needed a failure to contrast with her success. His gaze found me. I was standing in the shadows, half obscured by a decorative pillar, but he found me instantly. It was as if his disdain had a homing beacon. "But," he sighed, his tone shifting to one of heavy, paternal sorrow, "not every investment yields a return, and not every child embraces the opportunities they are given." The room went deadly quiet. Heads began to turn, following his line of sight. The sea of people parted slightly, creating a corridor of vision that led straight to me. I did not shrink. I did not look away. I stood perfectly still, my face a mask of bored indifference. I look at my other daughter, Olivia, standing there in the back, William said, his voice trembling with faux emotion. "And my heart breaks." He shook his head, looking down at the podium as if overcome with grief. "I tried. Everyone. God knows I tried. I offered her the world. 12 years ago, she was accepted into a fine university. I was ready to write the check. I was ready to give her the keys to her future. But Olivia had other ideas." He looked up, his eyes locking onto mine with a cruelty that was cold and sharp. "She told me that education was beneath her. She told me that our world, the world of business and responsibility, was suffocating. She wanted to find herself. So she took the money I gave her for books and ran away to Chicago to become a waitress. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. I heard gasps. I saw hands covering mouths. It was a lie so bold, so completely inverted from the truth, that it was almost impressive. He had turned his refusal to pay my tuition into my refusal to accept his generosity. He had turned my desperate survival into a whimsical, irresponsible gap year. I remember begging her to come home. William continued, improvising now, feeding off the crowd's reaction. I told her, "Olivia, you do not have to scrub tables. You are sterling." But she laughed in my face. She said she preferred the company of short-order cooks to the company of her own family. He gestured toward me with an open palm, like a ringmaster presenting a freak show attraction. And here she is, Olivia, the girl who chose to serve coffee rather than serve her legacy. I invited her tonight because I believe in forgiveness. I believe that no matter how far a child falls, a father's door should always be open, even if she comes dressed for a funeral. The crowd laughed. It was a nervous, tittering sound at first, but then it grew. They were laughing to please him. They were laughing because it was easier to mock the outcast than to question the king. Victoria stepped up to the microphone then, her diamonds flashing under the spotlight. She placed a hand on William's chest, playing the supportive wife. "Oh, William, do not be so hard on yourself," she purred, her voice amplified through the speakers. "We have to accept that everyone has different capacities." Olivia was always a special child, especially slow to understand the value of things. The laughter grew louder, sharper. It was the sound of 300 people confirming their own superiority by stepping on someone else. "Some people are born to lead," Victoria said, looking adoringly at Sophia. "And some are born to clean up after the leaders. It is just the natural order of things." Sophia, emboldened by the roar of approval, reached for the microphone. She looked at me across the vast expanse of the ballroom, her eyes glittering with malice. She saw my plain black dress, my messy hair, my lack of jewelry. She saw the sister she had displaced, the threat she thought she had neutralized. "Actually, that gives me an idea," Sophia said, her voice bright and chirping. "Since you are here, Olivia, and since you have so much experience in the service industry," she gestured to the tables laden with empty glasses and crumpled napkins. "The catering staff is a bit overwhelmed tonight with all these guests. Maybe you could pitch in if you help clear the dessert plates. I will make sure to give you a very generous tip. I know you probably need it for rent, or cat food, or whatever it is you spend your money on." The room exploded. The laughter was no longer polite. It was raucous. It was a mob mentality. They were howling. Men in $5,000 suits were slapping their knees. Women were wiping tears of mirth from their eyes. It was the ultimate humiliation. To be asked to serve the very people who had stolen my life. To be treated not just as a failure, but as a servant in the house that should have been mine. I stood there, feeling the sound waves of their laughter wash over me. It should have crushed me. 12 years ago, it would have destroyed me. I would have run out crying. I would have screamed. But I was not that girl anymore. I looked at William, who was smiling that smug, satisfied smile. I looked at Sophia, who was basking in the adoration of the crowd. I looked at Victoria, who was looking at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. I slowly raised my left wrist. I pulled back the sleeve of my black silk dress. I looked at the face of my Patek Philippe. It was 8:22 in the evening. The execution command was set for 8:23. I did not frown. I did not cry. I simply stared at them, and then, for the first time that night, I smiled. It was a small smile, a ghost of a smile, but if they had been looking closely, if they had stopped laughing for just 1 second, they would have seen that it was the smile of the executioner releasing the blade. 1 minute, I watched the second hand tick, 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 50 seconds. William was leaning into the microphone again, about to say something else. Perhaps another anecdote about my incompetence. 40 seconds. Sophia was waving to a friend in the front row, looking like she had just won a pageant. 30 seconds. I saw David standing by the exit. He caught my eye. He gave a barely perceptible nod. 20 seconds, the laughter was starting to die down, replaced by the murmur of conversation as people turned back to their drinks. 10 seconds. I took a deep breath, savoring the air. It smelled of expensive perfume and imminent destruction. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. The sound started as a low hum, barely audible over the jazz music playing in the background, but then it grew. Bzzzt, bzzzt, bzzzt. It was the sound of a phone vibrating against a hard surface, then another. Bzzzt, then another. Suddenly, William's pocket lit up. He frowned, reaching into his jacket. Sophia's clutch, which she was holding in her hand, began to vibrate violently. She looked down, confused. Then, a ripple went through the room. It was not laughter this time. It was the sound of 300 smartphones receiving a priority push notification simultaneously. The sound was deafening. It cut through the music. It cut through the chatter. It was a mechanical swarm, a chorus of digital alarms. William pulled his phone out. I saw his face change. The smugness vanished in a nanosecond, replaced by a look of utter confusion, and then sheer, unadulterated terror. Sophia looked at her screen and gasped. Dropping the microphone, it hit the stage with a deafening screech of feedback that made everyone wince. "What is this?" William shouted, his voice no longer booming, but shrill. "Why is my phone what is happening around the room?" The guests were checking their own devices. The whispers started instantly, rising in pitch and volume. "The stock. Look at the ticker. It says the accounts are frozen. What is going on with the server?" William looked up, his eyes scanning the room frantically. Looking for an answer, he looked at the IT consultants. He looked at the lawyers. They were all staring at their phones, their faces pale. Then, he looked at me. I was still standing in the shadows. I was still holding my warm water, but I was no longer looking at my watch. I was looking straight at him, and then, the massive screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a slideshow of Sophia's achievements, flickered. It went black for a second. Then, a new image appeared. It was not the logo of Sterling Holdings. It was a silver shield on a black background, the logo of Aegis Prime, and underneath it, in stark white letters, was a single message system override initiated. The room fell into a silence so profound, so heavy, that I could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. The laughter of the rich had ended. The countdown was over. The lesson had begun. The silence that followed the appearance of the Aegis Prime shield on the giant screen was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and pressurized. It was the sound of 300 people simultaneously realizing that the ground beneath their feet had turned into quicksand. The jazz band had stopped playing. The waiters had frozen in place. The only movement in the entire room was the frantic blinking of William Sterling, who was staring at the logo of the company he had hired to save him, unable to comprehend why it was interrupting his moment of glory. I set my glass of warm water down on a passing waiter's tray. The clink of the glass against the metal was sharp and deliberate, cutting through the hush like a gunshot. I stepped out from the shadows of the pillar. I did not walk like a waitress. I did not walk like the failure they had painted me to be. I walked with the cadence of a woman who owns the pavement she steps on. My black silk dress, which Sophia had mocked as simple, caught the light as I moved. Rippling like dark water, the rough diamonds around my neck, which they had dismissed as costume jewelry, glittered with a feral intensity. The crowd parted. They did not move out of politeness. They moved out of instinct. There was a shift in the atmospheric pressure around me. A sudden drop in temperature that signaled a predator had entered the ecosystem. I walked straight down the center aisle, the clicking of my heels on the marble floor echoing with a rhythmic, military precision. William saw me coming. For the first time in his life, he did not look at me with disdain. He looked at me with confusion, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. Sophia, who was still on her knees gathering the pieces of the microphone she had dropped, looked up. Her eyes were wide, the mascara beginning to smear, her arrogance fracturing into uncertainty. I reached the stairs of the stage. I ascended them slowly. 1, 2, 3. I walked past Sophia without glancing at her. I walked straight to the podium where my father stood gripping the lectern as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. He tried to speak. "Oh, Olivia. What are you?" I reached out and took the lapel microphone from his jacket. I unclipped it with a single, fluid motion. He was too stunned to stop me. I held the microphone to my lips. My voice was calm, devoid of the trembling anger I had felt 12 years ago. It was the voice of the architect. "You were right about one thing, Father," I said. The sound system carried my voice to every corner of the ballroom. Crisp and clear, I turned to face the audience, 300 pairs of eyes fixed on me in terrified fascination. He said I did not need his money to go to school. I continued, my tone conversational, as if I were discussing the weather, and he was correct. I did not need the sterling fortune, because while you were busy buying yachts and laundering money through shell companies in Panama, I was building something real. I turned back to William. "You said I refused to learn the family business. That is also true. I did not want to learn how to be a landlord or a venture capitalist. I wanted to learn how to control the systems that allow you to be those things. So I did." I pointed a finger at the giant screen behind me, where the silver shield of Aegis Prime still glowed ominously. I did not just learn about technology. Father, I mastered it, and then I monetized it. You mocked me for being a waitress, but for the last 5 years, I have been the one serving you. Every time you sent an email, every time you checked your stock portfolio, every time you wired money to hide your tax fraud, you were doing it on infrastructure that I built. William shook his head, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "What are you talking about? That is Aegis Prime. That is a security firm in Seattle." "Yes," I said. "And who do you think owns Aegis Prime?" The double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. The sound of heavy, purposeful footsteps filled the room. David Thorne walked in, flanked by 6 attorneys in charcoal suits. They carried briefcases, not champagne flutes. They moved in a V formation, cutting through the bewildered guests like a knife. They marched straight to the stage. David stopped at the bottom of the stairs, looked up at me, and bowed his head. It was a gesture of profound respect, one he had never shown to William Sterling. "Chairman Brown," David said, his voice projecting clearly, "the assets have been secured. The retrieval protocols are active. We are ready to proceed." The room gasped. The word hung in the air. "Chairman," William stumbled back, hitting the screen behind him. "Chairman," he whispered, his face draining of all color. You are the architect." "I am Olivia Brown," I said, finally introducing myself to the room, "founder and majority shareholder of Aegis Prime, the company you hired 3 days ago to save your life." I looked at Sophia. She was standing up now, shaking. "No," she stammered. "That is impossible. You drive a 10-year-old car. You wear rocks." I touched the diamonds in my throat. "These are raw diamonds, Sophia, uncut, unpolished, and worth approximately $4 million. Just because you cannot see the value of something does not mean it is worthless. It just means you are blind." I turned back to the audience. 3 days ago, Sterling Holdings signed a contract with my company. It was a Tier 1 protection agreement. It gave Aegis Prime full administrative control over every server, every hard drive, and every digital file owned by this family. I signaled to David. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. He walked up the stairs and handed it to me. I held the contract up. Clause 84. Section B, the Moral Leadership and Ethics Provision. I opened the document to the flagged page. It states, quite clearly, that Aegis Prime reserves the right to terminate the contract immediately and unilaterally if the executive leadership of the client company engages in public behavior that brings disrepute, shame, or unwarranted malice upon the partners of Aegis Prime. I looked at William. You just spent 20 minutes on this stage mocking me. You called me a failure. You called me a servant. You incited a room full of people to laugh at me. I closed the folder with a snap. I am the partner, father. You just spent your retirement speech slandering the owner of the security system that is currently holding your entire company together. You violated the ethics clause. William's hands were shaking so hard he could barely stand. Olivia, wait. It was a joke. It was just a speech. We can fix this. We are family. Family, I laughed. A cold, dry sound. You fired your family 12 years ago. This is business. And in business, a contract is a contract. I turned to David. Execute the termination protocol. David nodded and tapped his earpiece. Pull the plug. Now, on the screen behind us. The Aegis Prime logo flashed red. Then, a progress bar appeared. Terminating Sentinel Protocol. 100% system defense offline. Data encryption revoked. A collective groan went through the room as everyone looked at their phones. What did you do? Sophia screamed. Rushing at me. My phone. My email. Everything is gone. I did not delete it, I said calmly. I simply removed my protection. And I took back my intellectual property. The Sentinel AI has been withdrawn from your servers, which means I looked at the giant screen again. It flickered and went black. Your firewalls are down. Your encryption is gone. And all that data you were so worried about, it is currently sitting on a server in Seattle, locked behind a key that only I possess. I turned back to the contract. Per the terms of the violation, there is a penalty. A breach of the ethics clause triggers an immediate liquidity seizure to cover damages and potential reputation loss. I looked at William. The penalty is $50 million. $50 million? William shrieked. We do not have $50 million in cash. We are leveraged to the hilt, I know. I said, I have seen your books. I know you do not have the cash. That is why I executed the lien on your assets. David stepped forward. As of 2 minutes ago, Aegis Prime has exercised its right to freeze all liquid assets of Sterling Holdings and its executive officers to satisfy the penalty. Your corporate accounts are frozen. Your personal accounts are frozen. Even the credit card you used to pay for this party has been declined. The room was in chaos. People were shouting into their phones, trying to sell stock, trying to transfer money, but it was too late. The news was already hitting the wires. Sterling Holdings defaults. Aegis Prime exits. William fell to his knees. It was a slow, agonizing collapse. He looked small. He looked old. The giant of industry was just a man in a tuxedo who had forgotten to pay the bill. You cannot do this, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. You are my daughter. I am Olivia Brown. I corrected him, and I am simply collecting a debt. I looked at the audience. They were not laughing anymore. They were terrified. They were looking at me not as a waitress, but as a force of nature. They realized that by laughing at me, they had aligned themselves with a sinking ship. I walked over to the table where William had left his glass of 1982 vintage wine. I picked it up. I poured it out onto the floor. The dark red liquid stained the white marble like blood. I walked back to the microphone. $50 million. Father, you have 24 hours to find it. If you do not, I will begin liquidating the physical assets, the building, the yacht, the house in the Hamptons. I looked at Sophia. And the jewelry. I believe that necklace belongs to the company now. Sophia clutched her throat, backing away in horror. I placed the microphone on the podium. The sound of it hitting the wood was final. It was the sound of a gavel coming down. I looked at William one last time. Happy retirement. Dad, I hope you save some money for a mattress somewhere. Because from this moment on, the Sterling name is bankrupt, and this company, it does not work anymore. I turned and walked away. I did not run. I did not look back. I walked down the stairs, past the frozen waiters, past the trembling investors, past the wreckage of the life I had left behind. David and the lawyers fell in behind me, a phalanx of protection. As I reached the doors, I heard William screaming my name. It was a desperate, broken sound. Olivia, Olivia. Please, I kept walking. I pushed open the doors and stepped out into the cool night air of Manhattan. The valet was waiting with my rattling 10-year-old sedan. He looked at me, then at the team of high-powered lawyers behind me, and his jaw dropped. I took the keys from him. "Keep the change," I said. I got into my car. I started the engine. It coughed and spluttered, a stark contrast to the silence of the luxury cars around it. But to me, it sounded like music. It sounded like freedom. Inside the ballroom, the lights were still on, but the party was over. The sharks had been eaten by the ocean. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb. I checked my rearview mirror one last time. I saw the lights of the hotel fading into the distance. I did not feel joy. I did not feel happy. Those were soft emotions. What I felt was lighter, cleaner. I felt balanced. The scales had been tipped for 20 years. Tonight, I had leveled them. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. Transfer complete, penalty lien secured. I smiled. It was time to go home. Not to the penthouse, not to the mansion, but to the quiet, rain-soaked fortress in Seattle where I was the queen. The uneducated and worthless girl was dead. Long live the architect. The heavy brass doors of the hotel swung shut behind me, muting the stunned silence of the ballroom, but they could not block out the chaos that was about to erupt. I stood on the sidewalk, the humid Manhattan air clinging to my skin, watching the valet bring my battered sedan around. The engine sputtered as it idled. A mechanical cough that sounded infinitely more honest than the polite applause I had left behind. I had barely reached for the door handle when the hotel doors burst open again. Olivia. It was William. He was running, or at least attempting to run. His face was flushed a dangerous shade of crimson, and his tuxedo jacket was flapping open, exposing the sweat stains on his dress shirt. Victoria was right behind him, stumbling in her heels, clutching her diamond necklace as if she feared I might telekinetically rip it from her throat. "You cannot just walk away," William screamed, his voice cracking. He lunged toward me, his hand outstretched, desperate to grab my arm, to assert the control he had held over me for 3 decades. He never made it. 2 men in dark suits stepped out from the shadows of the portico. They were not hotel security. They were my private detail. Contracted professionals who moved with the silent efficiency of predators. One of them, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, simply stepped into William's path. He did not push him. He just became an immovable wall. William collided with the bodyguard and bounced back, nearly losing his balance. "Step back, mister." "Sterling," the bodyguard said. His voice was low, flat, and left no room for negotiation. "Get out of my way," William shouted, panting heavily. "That is my daughter. I command you to move. Miss Brown is no longer accepting unauthorized meetings," the bodyguard replied, crossing his arms. Victoria caught up, gasping for air, her perfectly sprayed hair now disheveled. "Olivia, have you lost your mind? You just destroyed us there. Do you have any idea who was in that room? The chairman of the Federal Reserve. The mayor. You have humiliated us." I leaned against the door of my rusted car, crossing my arms over my black silk dress. I looked at them, really looked at them, and saw not parents, but strangers who owed me a great deal of money. "I did not destroy you. Victoria," I said calmly, "I just turned on the lights. If the room is dirty, do not blame the person who flipped the switch." "You ungrateful little wretch," Victoria shrieked. Abandoning her facade of elegance, "We gave you life. And I just gave you a bill for $50 million, I countered, "which, by the way, is due tomorrow. I suggest you start checking the cushions of your antique sofas." William stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Olivia, please." The stock I checked my watch. The Patek Philippe face was now turned outward. "It has been exactly 4 minutes since I terminated the contract," I said. "By my calculations, the high-frequency trading algorithms on Wall Street have just processed the news that Aegis Prime has flagged Sterling Holdings as a high-risk liability, as if on cue." A sound began to emanate from the hotel lobby behind them. It started as a murmur, then grew into a roar. It was the sound of panic. Dozens of guests were spilling out onto the sidewalk, phones pressed to their ears, their faces pale under the streetlights. Cell one man was screaming into his phone, loosening his tie. "Dump it all. I do not care about the loss limit. Get me out of Sterling. My broker says it is in free fall," a woman cried out, clutching her husband's arm. "It is down 12%. 12% was just the beginning." I pulled my tablet from my bag and propped it up on the hood of my car. I tapped the screen, bringing up the live market feed. "Look, father," I said, pointing to the jagged red line plunging downward on the graph. "It is a landslide. 15%. 18%. William looked at the screen, his knees buckling. No, that is billions in market capitalization. Vaporized. You built your house on sand." "William," I said softly, "and you treated the only engineer who could reinforce the foundation like garbage. This is simply gravity taking effect." Suddenly, a piercing scream cut through the noise of the panic. It came from inside the ballroom, but it was loud enough to carry through the open doors. It was Sophia. I tapped another icon on my tablet. I had revoked their access to Sentinel, but I had not removed my own back doors. I still had eyes on every security camera in the building. The screen switched to a live feed of the stage. Sophia was standing by the podium, frantically tapping on a laptop that an aide had brought her. Her face was contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. On the large projection screen behind her, which was mirrored on her laptop, a single red message box was blinking. Access denied. Reason: moral clause violation. Administrative lockdown in effect. She was trying to transfer funds. I could see it in her keystrokes. She was trying to move the remaining capital from the corporate accounts to her private offshore shells before the freeze took full effect. But she was too slow. Daddy Sophia's voice echoed from the lobby as she ran out to join us on the sidewalk, clutching the laptop like a shield. "It is locked. Everything is locked. I cannot get into the Cayman accounts. I cannot get into the Swiss vault. It says I am locked out." William turned to her, grabbing her shoulders. "What do you mean you cannot get in? We need that liquidity to pay the bond." "It is her!" Sophia screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She locked us out. She stole the keys." "I did not steal them. Sophia," I said, my voice cutting through the humid air, "I own the lock, and right now, the system has flagged suspicious activity. Attempting to transfer corporate assets during a liquidity crisis, that looks an awful lot like bankruptcy fraud." "I am going to sue you," Sophia shrieked, stomping her foot like a petulant child. "I will ruin you." "You won't have the time," I said, glancing down the street. In the distance, the wail of sirens began to rise above the city noise. Blue and red lights reflected off the wet asphalt, growing brighter and more intense with every second. It was not one police car. It was a caravan. 6 unmarked SUVs with flashing grille lights, followed by 3 NYPD cruisers. William looked at the approaching lights, confused. The police. Did someone call the police because of the stock drop? Not the police. "Father," I said, stepping back to open my car door. "The stock drop is not a crime. Being stupid is not a crime." The convoy screeched to a halt right in front of the hotel entrance, blocking the line of limousines. Doors flew open. Men and women in windbreakers emblazoned with yellow letters poured out. "FBI." William froze. Victoria grasped his arm, her fingernails digging into his suit jacket. "What is this?" William whispered. I watched as the lead agent, a tall woman with a stern face, walked straight up the red carpet. She bypassed William. She bypassed Victoria. She walked straight to Sophia. "Sophia Sterling," the agent asked, her voice loud and clear. Sophia blinked, clutching her laptop tighter. "Yes, who are you?" "I am Special Agent Miller with the FBI Financial Crimes Division," the woman said. She held up a warrant. "We have a warrant for your arrest." "Arrest?" Sophia laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "Do you know who I am? I am the CEO of Sterling Holdings." "We know," Agent Miller said. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, and money laundering." The color drained from Sophia's face so fast she looked like a corpse. What? That is ridiculous. I haven't done anything." Agent Miller signaled to her team. Two agents stepped forward. "We received a comprehensive digital dossier 45 minutes ago," Agent Miller stated. "It contains logs of over 200 illegal wire transfers to shell companies in Panama and the Seychelles, authorized by your biometric signature. It also contains evidence of falsified tax returns for the last 5 years." Sophia's eyes darted to me. I was standing by my car, watching her. I did not smile. I simply nodded. "You," Sophia whispered, "you gave them the files I told you." "Sophia," I said, "I see everything. You thought you were hiding your theft in the marketing budget, but you left digital fingerprints everywhere. I just collected them." "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the agent commanded. "No," Sophia screamed, backing away. "Daddy, do something. Tell them who we are." William stepped forward, his hands shaking. "Officer, there must be a mistake. My daughter is a businesswoman." "This is a misunderstanding. Sir, step back or you will be charged with obstruction," Agent Miller warned. The agents grabbed Sophia's arms. She fought them, kicking and screaming, her designer dress tearing at the shoulder. "It wasn't me," Sophia shrieked, as the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "It was a mistake. I was just borrowing it, Daddy. Tell them I was just borrowing it." The guests who were still loitering on the sidewalk, the ones who had laughed at me 10 minutes ago, were now holding up their phones, recording the entire scene. The flashbulbs popped, capturing the image of the sterling golden girl being dragged away in cuffs. Victoria let out a moan, swaying on her feet. My baby. My baby." She turned to me, her eyes filled with venom. "You did this? You are a monster. We will bail her out. We will hire the best lawyers in the country. We will crush you in court. With what money?" "Victoria," I asked softly. "We have assets," Victoria spat. "We have the penthouses, the summer homes, my jewelry." I looked at her with a pity that was far worse than hatred. "You really don't know. Do you know what?" Victoria snapped. "Ask Sophia," I said, pointing to where the agents were shoving my sister into the back of an SUV. "Ask her how she covered the losses on her failed investments last year." Victoria looked at Sophia. "Sophia, what is she talking about?" Sophia looked through the window of the police car, tears streaming down her face. "Ruining her makeup. I had to. Mom." "The market was down. I thought I could make it back." "Make what back?" William demanded, moving to the car window. "Sophia, what did you do?" "I mortgaged the deeds." Sophia sobbed. "I forged your signatures. The penthouse, the Hamptons house, the yacht, they are all collateral. If the stock drops below $10, the bank takes everything." William stopped breathing. He stared at his daughter, the horror of the realization washing over him. "You mortgaged our home," William whispered. "Everything." Sophia wailed. "Even Mom's jewelry collection. I signed the lien last month." Victoria made a sound that was not human. It was a strangled gasp of pure devastation. Her hands flew to her throat, clutching the diamond necklace she was wearing. The necklace that, technically, belonged to a bank in Zurich. Her eyes rolled back in her head. Her knees gave way. She collapsed onto the red carpet in a heap of silk and despair. "Victoria," William cried, dropping to his knees beside her. I watched them. The tableau was complete. Sophia in the back of a police car. Victoria unconscious on the ground. William kneeling in the dirt, surrounded by the ruins of his empire. The stock ticker on my tablet refreshed. Sterling Holdings was down 45%. It was trading at $8 a share. The bank triggers had just been activated. They were officially homeless. I got into my car and slammed the door. The sound was solid and final. I tossed the tablet onto the passenger seat. The valet was staring at me, his mouth open. I rolled down the window. "If anyone asks," I said to him, "tell them the architect sends her regards." I put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. I drove past the line of police cars, past the screaming investors, past the flashing lights. I merged into the traffic of Manhattan, the city lights blurring in the rain on my windshield. The chaos receded in my rearview mirror, shrinking until it was just a speck of red and blue light. I turned on the radio. A jazz station was playing a slow, mournful trumpet solo. It suited the mood. The storm had made landfall. The structure had failed, and I was the only one with an umbrella. It had been exactly 7 days since the gala. 7 days since the collapse of the House of Sterling. In the world of finance, a week is an eternity. In that short span of time, the stock of Sterling Holdings had delisted from the major exchange, turning from a blue-chip asset into a penny stock that traders wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. The sharks had feasted, picked the bones clean, and moved on to fresh water. I was waiting in my office on the top floor of the Aegis Prime headquarters in Seattle. We called it the Fortress for a reason. It was not just a building. It was a physical manifestation of my paranoia and my power to get to me. A visitor had to pass through 3 layers of security that made the TSA look like a greeting committee. I watched the monitor on my desk. Camera 1 showed the lobby. A man was standing there, looking lost. He was wearing a gray suit that looked like it had been slept in. His shoulders were slumped, his hair was thinning and unkempt, and he held a manila envelope in his shaking hands. It was William Sterling. It took him 20 minutes to clear security. Layer 1 was the metal detector and bag search. I watched as the guard made him empty his pockets. A cheap plastic comb, a wallet that looked deflated, a set of keys that no longer opened a mansion or a yacht. Layer 2 was the biometric scan. He had to press his hand against the glass panel. The system didn't recognize him as a VIP. It flagged him as visitor, low priority. He had to wait while a junior associate came down to manually approve his entry. I saw him arguing with the receptionist, his face red, gesturing wildly. I didn't need audio to know he was saying, "Do you know who I am?" The answer, sadly for him, was that nobody knew who he was anymore. He was just a bankrupt old man with a history of bad decisions. Layer 3 was the elevator. It was a glass capsule that ascended on the exterior of the building, offering a panoramic view of the city. For most, it was breathtaking. For him, I imagined it felt like ascending a gallows. When the elevator doors finally hissed open into my private antechamber, he hesitated. He stepped out onto the polished concrete floor, looking around nervously. My office was vast, encased in floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out over the Puget Sound. It was silent, cool, and aggressively modern. There was no mahogany here, no leather wingback chairs, no smell of cigars. It smelled of ozone and white tea. He saw me sitting behind my desk. I didn't stand up. I didn't smile. I just watched him walk the long distance across the room. He looked terrible. The confident, booming titan of industry I had seen on stage a week ago was gone. In his place was a ghost. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles. He had lost weight. His collar hung loose around his neck. "Olivia," he rasped, his voice sounding dry and brittle. "Mr. Sterling," I corrected him, keeping my tone neutral. "You have 5 minutes. My schedule is quite full." He flinched at the formality. He reached for the back of the guest chair, gripping it for support. 5 minutes, he asked, a hint of his old indignation flaring up before dying out. I flew a commercial. "Olivia, middle seat. I came all the way here to talk to you, to reason with you. There is no reason left," I said. "There is only math, and the math says you are insolvent. Please," he begged, sinking into the chair uninvited. "You have to stop this. Sophia is in Rikers Island. They denied bail. They put her in the general population. Olivia. She called me yesterday. She was crying. She is terrified. She is not built for that place. She committed federal crimes," I said, picking up a digital stylus and twirling it between my fingers. "She stole from shareholders. She evaded taxes. Prison is usually the destination for people who do those things." "She is your sister," William shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. I stopped twirling the stylus. I looked at him with a gaze so cold it could have frozen the rain outside. My sister, I repeated. You mean the girl who mocked me while I was walking in the snow? The girl who used my mother's life insurance money to buy a boat. The girl who tried to frame me as a servant at her party. That Sister William shrank back. She was foolish. She was spoiled. I admit that. Victoria and I made mistakes with her, but she does not deserve to be destroyed. And Victoria is in the hospital. The stress caused a minor stroke. She has nothing. Olivia, the bank took the house this morning. They are on the street. And where are you staying? I asked. I am in a motel near the airport, he whispered, looking down at his hands. I leaned back in my chair. It is a tragedy, I said, but it is a tragedy you wrote, directed, and produced. I am just the audience. It is not too late, he pleaded, leaning forward. You have the power. You can drop the lawsuit. You can tell the FBI that the data was misinterpreted. You can bail out the company. We can rebuild. Olivia, together, you and me. You have the mind for it. I see that now. You are a Sterling. You are the true heir. I should have seen it sooner. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh, but it held no humor. It was the sound of absurdity. You still don't get it, do you? I asked. You think this is about me wanting your approval. You think I did all this because I wanted you to finally look at me and say, "Good job, Olivia." I opened a drawer in my desk. I pulled out a thin, black folder. I slid it across the desk toward him. Open it. William looked at the folder suspiciously. He reached out with a trembling hand and flipped it open. The first item was a yellowed, taped-together piece of paper. It was covered in handwriting, my handwriting from 12 years ago. Do you recognize that? I asked. He squinted. It looks like an essay. It is the admission essay for the Institute of Technology. I said, the one I showed you the night you told me I wasn't smart enough for college. You tore it in half and threw it in the trash. I fished it out after you went to sleep. I taped it back together. I kept it as a reminder that your opinion of my intelligence was irrelevant. He stared at the paper, his mouth slightly open. Turn the page, I commanded. He flipped the page. It was a photocopy of a hospital bill. It was dated 20 years ago. The name on the patient line was Grace Brown. My mother. That is the bill for the experimental treatment Mom needed in her final months. I said, my voice dropping an octave. The treatment you refused to pay for because you said it was too expensive and statistically unlikely to work. You let her die in a county hospice while you were buying your first yacht. William went pale. I didn't know. The doctor said you had the money. I cut him off. You just didn't want to spend it on a dying woman when you had a new mistress, Victoria, waiting in the wings. Turn the page. He turned to the final document. It was a subpoena, a federal subpoena for Sophia Sterling. You see, Father, I said, standing up and walking to the window, I realized something a long time ago. You didn't hate me because I was uneducated. You didn't hate me because I was worthless. I turned to face him, my silhouette framed by the gray sky. You hated me because I looked like her. I looked like Grace, and more importantly, I thought like her. She was the only person who ever challenged you. She was the only one who saw through your facade. You were terrified of her intelligence, and when you saw it blooming in me, you tried to crush it. You wanted Sophia to succeed because Sophia is like you, hollow, vain, and easily manipulated. You wanted a mirror, not a daughter. William sat in silence. The truth of my words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. He couldn't argue. He couldn't deny it. He looked at the hospital bill, then at the essay, and finally, he slumped. The fight went out of him. He looked like a balloon that had been punctured. You are right, he whispered. I was scared. You were so intense, even as a child. You saw everything. He looked up at me, tears welling in his eyes. I am sorry. Olivia, I am so sorry. I watched him cry. It was a pathetic sight. A week ago, I might have felt a flicker of satisfaction. Now, I just feel exhausted. Your apology is noted, I said, walking back to the desk. But we have business to conclude. Business, he asked, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. There is no business left. The company is dead. The company is dead, I agreed. But the people are not. There are 4,000 employees at Sterling Holdings. Secretaries, janitors, mid-level managers, people who have families, people who did nothing wrong. They are about to lose their livelihoods because of your greed. I pressed a button on my desk. A section of the surface slid open, revealing a fresh legal document. I am making you an offer, I said. I am going to buy the assets of Sterling Holdings. I will absorb the debt. I will pay the fines. I will keep the employees on the payroll. William's eyes widened with a flicker of hope. Will you save the company? I'm not saving your company, I said sharply. I am buying the infrastructure. There are conditions. I continued. 2 of them. Anything, he said. First, I said, the name Sterling is toxic. It will be erased. Every sign, every letterhead, every logo will be removed. The company will be rebranded. What would you call it? He asked. Grace Innovations. I said. He flinched as if I had slapped him. You are naming it after her. She is the one who paid the price for your ambition, I said. It is only fitting that her name is on the building that replaces yours. And the second condition, he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I slid the document toward him. You will sign this. It is a complete abdication of all rights. You will resign from the board. You will surrender your voting shares. You will agree to a lifetime ban from holding any executive position in the company. In exchange, I will set up a small, fixed pension for you. It is not much. It is the equivalent of the minimum wage salary I earned when I was working 3 jobs in Chicago. It is enough to rent a small apartment and buy groceries. You will not starve, but you will never fly private again. You will never drink vintage wine again. You will live like the people you used to mock. He stared at the document. It was a death warrant for his ego. It was the end of William Sterling the tycoon. It was the beginning of William Sterling the nobody. And Sophia, he asked, and Victoria can live with you, if she chooses. I said, as for Sophia, she has to face the law. I cannot buy her way out of federal prison. She has to learn that actions have consequences. That is a lesson you failed to teach her. William picked up the stylus. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He looked at the document, then at me. You are cruel, he said softly. I am just, I replied. He looked down at the screen. He hesitated for a long moment. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the last gasps of his pride fighting against the reality of his desperation. But he had no choice. He had nowhere to go, no friends, no money, no future. He pressed the stylus to the screen and signed his name, William Sterling. The signature was shaky, jagged, nothing like the bold flourish he used to put on contracts. It is done, I said, pulling the document back. William stood up. He looked unsteady, frail. He looked at me one last time, searching for something affection, forgiveness, anger. But he found nothing. I really am sorry, Olivia, he said again, his voice cracking. I wish I had been a better father. I looked at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. The anger that had fueled me for 12 years was gone. The hatred was gone. There was just a vast, empty space where a father should have been. I sat down in my chair and turned my attention back to my monitors. Words are just air. William. I said without looking up. Apologies only have value when the listener cares, and I stopped caring a long time ago. He stood there for a moment longer, waiting for a dismissal or a goodbye. When none came, he turned and walked slowly toward the elevator. I watched him go on the monitor. He looked smaller than when he had arrived. The elevator doors closed, sealing him inside the glass capsule. I watched as he descended. Down, 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 away from my fortress, back to the earth, back to the rain, back to the obscurity he so richly deserved. I touched the file on my desk, the one with my mother's hospital bill. Hello. Grace Innovations. I whispered to the empty room. I closed the file. The past was settled. The debt was paid. Now, there was only the future. The elevator doors hissed shut, sealing William Sterling inside the glass capsule for his long descent back to the earth. I watched the numbers on the display panel drop. 42, 41, 40, with each passing floor. The tension that had knotted my shoulders for 12 years began to loosen. It did not snap. It simply dissolved. Like sugar in hot water. I stood there for a long time in the silence of my office. It was over. The war was over. The fortress had been held. The following months were a blur of legal proceedings and bureaucratic dismantling, played out in the headlines of every major newspaper. The fall of the Sterling Empire was swift and absolute. Sophia's trial was the media event of the season, though not the kind she had always dreamed of starring in. She arrived at the federal courthouse not in a limousine, but in a corrections van. She wore a gray jumpsuit that washed out her complexion, and her hair, stripped of its expensive treatments, hung limp around her face. The jury did not deliberate long. The digital paper trail I had provided was irrefutable. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for tears, sentenced Sophia to 5 years in a minimum security federal facility for wire fraud and embezzlement. I did not go to the sentencing. I watched it on the news from my desk, when the gavel came down. Sophia looked at the camera, her eyes wild and searching, perhaps looking for a savior who was no longer there. There was no father to bail her out. There was no sister to clean up her mess. There was only the consequence of her own greed. Victoria fared little better. The liquidity seizure had drained their accounts dry, to pay off the remaining personal debts and avoid prison time herself for complicity. She had to liquidate her personal assets. The auction was brutal. I heard through David that she wept when the gavel fell on her diamond collection, the pieces selling for a fraction of what she believed they were worth. She and William moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. It was a decent place, clean and safe, but it was miles away both geographically and metaphorically from the penthouse on Fifth Avenue. William was living on the pension I provided, a humble sum that forced him to budget for groceries and take public transportation, for the first time in his life. He was learning the value of $1 because he had to count every single one of them. But I did not dwell on their misery. I did not visit them to gloat. I did not drive past their apartment to watch them struggle. That would have been petty, and I was done with pettiness. I was busy building something new. One evening, about 6 months after the confrontation, I stood on the rooftop terrace of the Aegis Prime building. The Seattle rain had finally stopped, leaving the air scrubbed clean and smelling of pine and ocean salt. The city lights twinkled below me, a grid of electricity that I helped protect. I leaned against the glass railing, holding a cup of tea. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was light. For years, I had been fueled by a heavy, burning coal of rage. Now, that fire was out, but I did not feel cold. I felt warm. I felt peaceful. "You look like you finally put down the luggage." I turned around. Silas was standing there. He was leaning on his cane, his gray beard a little whiter than when we had first met in Chicago, but his eyes were just as sharp. He was wearing his usual wool coat, looking out of place amidst the sleek glass and steel of my headquarters. "Silas," I smiled. "How did you get up here? My security protocols are supposed to be impenetrable. I taught you how to write those protocols, kid." He chuckled, limping over to join me at the railing. "I kept a back door for myself, just in case you ever got too big for your britches and locked me out." I laughed. "I would never lock you out. You are the only reason I'm standing here." Silas looked out at the city, his expression softening. "You did good, Olivia. You didn't just beat them, you outgrew them. That is the hardest part. Most people get their revenge and then realize they have nothing left because the hate was the only thing holding them together. But you built a life." I looked down at my hands. I almost lost myself. "Silas, there were moments when I wanted to destroy them completely. I wanted to leave them with nothing. But you didn't," Silas said quietly. "You showed mercy. You gave them a pension. You kept the employees. You turned the company into something good." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn, leather-bound notebook. He hesitated for a moment, tracing the cover with his thumb. "There is something I never told you, Olivia." I looked at him, sensing a shift in his tone. "What is it that day in Chicago?" Silas said, staring at the horizon. When I found you outside the coffee shop, it wasn't an accident. I frowned. What do you mean? You said you saw me at the library. You said you liked my code. I did. He nodded. But I was looking for you long before that. He handed me the notebook. Open it. I took the book. The leather was soft with age. I opened it to the first page. There was a photograph taped to the inside cover. It was a black and white picture of two young men standing in front of a massive mainframe computer from the 1970s. One of them was Silas, young and beardless. The other man was my grandfather. My mother's father. I gasped. Silas, is this— Your grandfather and I were pioneers, Silas said, his voice raspy. We wrote some of the first encryption protocols together back in the day. He was the brilliant one. I was just a mechanic. When he died, he left everything to your mother, Grace. He knew William was a shark. He warned Grace, but love makes people blind. I stared at the photo, my heart pounding, when Grace got sick. Silas continued, looking at me with eyes full of sorrow. She tracked me down. She knew she was dying, and she knew William wouldn't protect you. She sent me a letter. She asked me to watch over you. She said, My daughter has a fire in her. Do not let William extinguish it. I felt tears prick my eyes. My mother, even from her deathbed. She had been fighting for me. I wanted to intervene sooner, Silas admitted. When William kicked you out, God, I wanted to storm that mansion and tear him apart. But I knew that if I gave you the money, if I made it easy for you, you would never learn your own strength. You needed to survive the fire to become the steel. So I waited. I watched you in Chicago. I watched you struggle. It broke my heart, kid. But I waited until you were ready. And when you hacked that register, I knew. I knew you were Grace's daughter. I looked at him, the tears finally spilling over. I wasn't alone. Never, Silas said, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. You were never alone. We were always there. Your mother, your grandfather, me. We were the ghosts in the machine, watching your back. I closed the notebook and held it to my chest. For 12 years, I had defined myself by the people who had rejected me. I had built my identity around the hole they left in my heart. But now, I realized that the hole had been filled all along. I had been loved. I had been chosen. Thank you, I whispered. Silas patted my shoulder. Don't thank me. Just make sure the name Grace means something again. I wiped my eyes and looked at the city. It means everything. The next morning, I signed the paperwork for the new foundation. We called it the Grace Scholarship Fund. It was fully funded by the profits from the new company, Grace Innovations. The mission was simple. We found students who had been rejected, students who had no money, students who had been told they were not good enough. And we gave them a full ride, tuition, housing, books, and a job waiting for them when they graduated. I personally reviewed the first batch of applications. I saw myself in so many of them. A boy from Detroit who lived in his car but had a perfect math score. A girl from Alabama who taught herself to code on a library computer. They were the discarded diamonds of the world, and I was going to polish them. That afternoon, I decided to take a drive. I didn't take the sedan. I took one of the company cars. A quiet, electric vehicle that glided over the pavement. I drove out of the city, heading north toward the estate. The rain had returned, a gentle drizzle that blurred the edges of the world. I drove for an hour until I reached the familiar iron gates. I pulled the car over and rolled down the window. The massive S that used to adorn the gates was gone. The gold leaf was gone. The ostentatious statues of lions were gone. In their place was a simple, modern sign made of brushed steel. Grace Innovations, Research Center. I had turned the Sterling mansion into a think tank. The ballroom where I had been humiliated was now a server farm. The bedrooms where Sophia had hoarded her clothes were now dormitories for the scholarship students. The study where William had denied me my future was now a library, open 24 hours a day for anyone who wanted to learn. I watched as a group of students walked through the gates, laughing, carrying laptops. They looked happy. They looked free. They had no idea that the ground they were walking on had once been a monument to greed, to them. It was just a place where dreams were funded. I sat there for a long time, listening to the rain on the roof of the car. I thought about William, sitting in his small apartment, counting coupons. I thought about Sophia, sitting in her cell, staring at a concrete wall. I thought about Victoria, mourning her jewelry. And then I thought about the girl who had walked out of these gates 12 years ago, dragging a suitcase through the snow, terrified and alone. I wished I could go back and tell her. I wished I could whisper in her ear, "Keep walking. It is going to be okay. You are going to build a world that is so much bigger than this." I put the car in drive. I didn't need to stare at the past anymore. The house was just a building. The Sterlings were just people. And I was Olivia Brown. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I wasn't wearing the black dress anymore. I was wearing a soft gray sweater and jeans. I wasn't wearing the diamond necklace. I didn't need the armor. I smiled. It wasn't the sharp, cold smile of the executioner. It was a warm, soft smile. It was the smile of a woman who had nothing left to prove. I turned the car around and headed back toward the city, toward the future, toward the light. They told me I was uneducated. I proved that I could rewrite the code of their entire existence. They told me I was worthless. I proved them right, because my value is priceless, and it cannot be bought with their money. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It has been a long journey from the cold streets of Chicago to the skyline of Seattle, and I am grateful you walked it with me. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy subway in New York, a quiet room in London, or maybe somewhere sunny like Brazil? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Olivia's revenge. If you enjoyed this story, please invite you to subscribe to the channel Daisy Revenge Stories, like the video, and don't forget to hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people. Your support means the world to me.